music and love go together pretty good because people who like music love music, and whether it's Beethoven or Hank Williams or Bob Wills, whatever, if you like it, it's great.
Country music superstars Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Merle Haggard have been honored as the outlaw movement's torchbearers, representing rebellion, independence, and raw authenticity. They defined an era, a sound, and an attitude that forever altered the face of country music. But what if the reality of the music was harsher than anyone could have imagined? Willie Nelson, 84, is finally speaking out about a betrayal that has haunted him for decades and is at the heart of the outlaw movement. For years, the world believed that these legendary personalities adhered to a code of defiance and honor. But under the blur of whiskey-soaked tours, the strumming of guitars, and the acclaim of loving fans, there was a secret Willie couldn't and wouldn't ignore any longer. Merle Haggard, who was once regarded as a brother in arms and helped define what it meant to be an outlaw, was not the guy he appeared to be. And now, as time passes and many of the true outlaws fade into history, Willie Nelson breaks his quiet. What he reveals about Merle Haggard will challenge all you thought you knew about the outlaw's legacy and the price they paid for popularity. The outlaw country movement was more than simply music. It was a cultural statement. In the early 1970s, Nashville was the epicenter of commercial country music, a sleek, polished, and safe version of the genre that did not appeal to everyone. That's when Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Merle Haggard emerged, delivering a raw, gritty sound that defied conventional conventions. They were the rebels, the outsiders, the ones who created songs about heartbreak, freedom, and the American experience without the polish that Nashville expected. The label Outlaw swiftly became synonymous with these icons, each carving out a unique position in country music history. Their music was unrepentant, their lifestyles wild, and their reputations reflected the turbulence of their existence. Fans liked them for being sincere and refusing to submit to the corporate machine. They personified the renegade attitude, the notion that country music was about more than simply the lyrics, but also about living life on your own terms. In this realm of outlaws, the trio took the lead. They were like brothers in arms, with each contributing to the genre's evolution. However, while they shared the same stage and, in many cases, the same path, there were fissures beneath the surface that only became obvious with time. Despite their companionship, crazy tours, and renowned duets, something lurked in the background, threatening to tear them apart. The outlaw movement was intended to be a rebellion against the system, an escape from the constraints of corporate control. But as Willie Nelson looks on those years, he realizes that not everyone was in it for the same reasons. While some followed the rules, others engaged in a far more deadly game. Merle Haggard, a name synonymous with outlaw country, was one of those who led two lives. And it wasn't until long later that Willie Nelson realized the full degree of the treachery. In 1976, Bakersfield, California, was a hotbed of the outlaw movement. The town's honky-tonk bars and dusty highways were home to a new kind of country music, one that wasn't ashamed to display the raw edges, anguish, and defiance that defined this new wave. It was the ideal setting for legends like Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard to brainstorm, compose, and perform songs that spoke to the working class, the underdogs. That year, however, what appeared to be another chapter in their shared past swiftly turned into a betrayal. It all began with a terrible transaction, a collaboration that soured and laid the groundwork for something much darker. A member of Willie's band was involved in a bust in Bakersfield, which would have been a typical arrest. However, after the dust settled, Merle Haggard was nowhere to be found. He didn't lend a hand or speak up for his fellow outlaw. Instead, he vanished. and the questioning began. Willie found the disappearance not only curious, but also telling. The other band members were left to face the repercussions of their conduct. But Merle, the man who had always sang about the ordinary man's sufferings, the one who had always been regarded as the voice of the oppressed, was not present. No apologies. There's no explanation. Just silence. Merle has gone AWOL before when things became bad. As Willie watched the events unfold, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He began to wonder why Merle was always clean, while the rest of them were dirty. Why was he always gone when the cops were knocking? Was it a coincidence? Or was there more to this story? Willie attempted to push the thoughts aside. He didn't want to believe Merle, the man who had stood beside him for years, could be involved in something sinister. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was not going away. 7 years later, in 1983, history appeared to repeat itself in Fort Worth, Texas. Another bust. Another tour is derailed by a run-in with the law. Willie wasn't just an observer this time. He was there in the thick of it. The sequence had become all too familiar: arrests, tension, and pandemonium. But what struck out this time was an unsettling sense that he had been here before, that it was déjà vu. As the bust went down, the rest of Willie's team dealt with the heat, the cuffs, and the consequences. However, Merle was nowhere to be found. His tour bus, which had been known for smelling like a science lab on wheels, was unusually quiet. There was no sign of Merle and no indication that he had been anywhere near the site. For Willie, this was no longer a coincidence. He was beginning to notice a pattern. Whenever things went south, Merle was always one step ahead and out of sight. The other band members who were involved in the bust were left to cope with the aftermath. But what about Merle? He slid through the gaps again. Willie Nelson received a long-awaited insight as he saw the same event play out again. It was no longer just a feeling. This was the truth. Merle Haggard was not only a member of the outlaw movement, he was something altogether different. He was a *** King Narc, Willie continued suddenly, his words as sharp as before. Willie's opinion was based on more than simply suspicion. Willie eventually claimed that he had seen the secret court files. He witnessed the immunity bargains. He witnessed the covert meetings between Merle and the authorities. He witnessed how Merle had gotten past the law undamaged, while everyone else had paid the price. Merle's silence at important points began to make sense. Willie learned that the man he had once considered a friend wasn't just fleeing the authorities. He was cooperating with it. Merle utilized the system that the outlaws had battled against, which they all considered to be corrupt, to mask his tracks. For years, Willie Nelson remained quiet. He kept the reality hidden, buried under the weight of his devotion to the outlaw image they had all created together. The outlaw movement was about more than simply music. It was a rebellion against Nashville's glossy produced culture. It was about living freely, rejecting expectations, and banding together as a family of misfits who refused to be confined. But the reality behind that image was never as straightforward as it seemed. In the face of Merle's betrayal, Willie chose silence. He could have revealed the reality and demolished the myth that so many admirers held dear, but he decided to keep it. He elected to remain silent for the sake of the fans, the music, and the heritage of the outlaws who had sacrificed everything to make country music a reality again. Willie did not want to disrupt the magic the outlaws had created. He understood how essential the image of the outlaw was to listeners and the tradition of country music. He realized how powerfully such songs and performances spoke to those who regarded them as symbols of rebellion and freedom. To accept that one of the men who had helped shape that image was not who he looked would have been a betrayal of all they stood for. But as the years passed, the weight of that quiet became heavier. The outlaws were dying off. some from old age, some from the lifestyle that had defined them. The newer generation of performers, who had grown up idolizing Willie, Merle, and Waylon, were now pursuing the same outlaw persona. But what they didn't realize was that the truth behind that picture had been meticulously crafted, and it wasn't quite as genuine as they had been made to believe. Willie observed as a new wave of musicians, many of whom were unaware of the true cost of the outlaw lifestyle, attempted to fill the shoes of men like him and Merle. They craved the image, celebrity, and independence that the term outlaw implied, but they were unaware of the terrible facts lurking in the shadows. Willie began to feel the weight of his silence more than ever. The genuine outlaws, those who had genuinely lived the life, were dying off. And the myth, the illusion, was being hijacked by a new generation that was unaware of the price paid for it. Now that the majority of the original outlaws have passed away and the myth of the outlaw movement has faded, Willie Nelson is ready to share the truth. He is finally breaking his silence after all these years. The man who helped create the entire concept of an outlaw was not who everyone believed he was. Merle Haggard, with all his brilliance and accomplishment, was more than just a country music legend. He was not the free-spirited, rebellious outlaw that admirers imagined him to be. Merle Haggard, according to Willie, was playing a risky game in which he wore the outlaw reputation like a badge of honor while concealing a deeper truth below it all. The man who composed songs about jailbirds and hard times was leading his own double life, which was far more calculated and controlled than anyone understood. He was a F***-seeking narc, Willie admits, with the conviction that only years of thought can provide. Merle wasn't simply fleeing from the law, he was part of it. While the rest of the band was involved in busts, arrests, and the craziness of life on the road, Merle always appeared to emerge unscathed. The police appeared to know exactly where he was and when he was. They never touched him. There were no arrests or raids on his tour buses, even when there was sufficient evidence to warrant so. While the rest of the crew battled to deal with the aftermath, Merle was safe, shielded by the very system they were all fighting against. Willie later claimed that he had seen the sealed court files. He observed the immunity offers that Merle was offered. He witnessed Merle's backdoor discussions with law enforcement officers. Merle was never put under any real strain, and he never ran the risk of being caught in the same way his bandmates were. While the other outlaws lived and died by their own rules, Merle lived a life of meticulous maneuvering, utilizing his status to keep one step ahead of the authorities. For decades, Willie Nelson remained silent. He understood that disclosing the truth about Merle Haggard, the darker side of the outlaw movement, would shatter the myth that had elevated them all to legend status. The outlaws were more than simply musicians. They represented insurrection, independence, and living life on one's own terms. In a world where country music had been sanitized and commercialized, the outlaws represented the final bastion of authenticity, refusing to submit to the Nashville machine. Willie recognized the potency of the myth. He didn't want to shatter the illusion of these larger-than-life figures who stood for more than just music. They were symbols of resistance, freedom, and self-expression. To reveal the truth about Merle's hidden activities, his connections to law enforcement, and the protective bubble he had built around himself would be to tear the entire fabric of what they had established. Willie believed that the fans who embraced the outlaw mentality deserved to keep the mystique, the sense of defiance. However, as the years passed, the burden of remaining silent began to weigh on him. The actual outlaws, those who had lived the life, were gradually disappearing. Waylon was gone. Johnny Cash had died. The foundation of the movement was withering, and with it, the understanding of what it truly meant to be an outlaw. The newer generation of musicians, yearning for the outlaw image, were unaware of the sacrifices, challenges, and costs associated with that lifestyle. They were following an illusion, a romanticized image of what it meant to be free, unaware that the true outlaws had fought wars much beyond what they witnessed on stage. Willie knew it was time for the truth to be revealed. He could no longer protect the myth for nostalgic reasons. It wasn't only about him anymore. It was about ensuring that future generations know the full tale, including the true cost of the music and the revolt that marked the renegade spirit. As Willie Nelson reflects on his career and years of silence, the truth about the outlaw movement emerges. The true outlaws were those who confronted the law instead of fleeing it. Merle Haggard's role in the movement, however legendary, was not as pure as popular belief implied. The truth is terrible, but it is required to grasp the true cost of the rebellion that country music once represented. Willie's willingness to speak up now, after years of guarding the myth, demonstrates how much he loves authenticity. For him, music will always come first, and great outlaws deserve a place in history. More importantly, it is about setting the record straight for fans, younger musicians, and the future of country music. Willie Nelson is more than simply a songwriter. He is the last true outlaw, and he is rewriting history. The truth may be difficult, but it is what the music and the legends who created it deserve.